My name is Lauren Barrett, and I'm currently engaging in a study to explore women with postpartum depression and art therapy directives. And I'm interested in learning more about the systemic structures at hand in your study, your experiences in research regarding social justice, as well as community arts-based research. Do you have any questions before we get started?
No.
Okay. So tell me about your study.
So I designed and attempted to implement, or I did implement, a resilience building art intervention for middle school students in Baltimore City. And so the idea was to look at whether or not this art intervention, that was art as therapy, not art therapy, could bolster specific resilience factors. So we looked at self-esteem, emotional reactivity, sense of mastery, and then social relatedness. And so we were trying to see, I had two different groups, the intervention group and a control group, and I was trying to see, first of all, did the art intervention increase resilience scores, and second of all, did it increase them more than a kind of therapeutic art intervention could? So something that was similar, like robotics. You're still creating something, but it wasn't therapeutic art.
What was the purpose or question that you had wanted to explore for your research?
Yeah, so it was looking at resilience and whether, first of all, could I design a resilience building art intervention? So that was kind of like the subtext question, because I had never done that before. But the formal research question was, does this therapeutic art intervention increase resilience in middle school students who are at risk due to economic disadvantage?
What do you think the contributing factors were for the outcomes?
There were a lot. I think part of it, so we had two measures, kind of just like descriptive measures that we used. So one was a stressful life event scale. So we were trying to get a base assessment of what stressors or traumas each student had experienced. Mm-hmm. And then we also had a perceived racism scale. So what were the students, because they were predominantly students of color, what were their experiences within the education system in terms of perceptions of racial discrimination towards them. And so I think we weren't able to necessarily control for any of those factors. We gathered data on what ones were there, but because it was in a school setting, because I was going into, the school already had kind of an existing elective program, and my art program was one of the offerings, I had to kind of work within the school system and the curriculum that was already in place. And so while I think all of those factors, what are all the stressful life events that they may have experienced, their experiences of perceived racism, I think those got in the way at times, and we couldn't necessarily control for them or target specific, like specific populations or specific stressors or anything like that. So to me, so I think what we do know about poverty is that it's one of the most significant risk factors because it's so multifactorial, and it's systemic, it's institutional, and it intersects with culture and identity in a myriad of ways. And so I think that really sets up kind of this known entity that there are lots of risk factors these students may be experiencing. The other piece of that is they also may have a lot of protective factors that we don't know, and what we know about resilience is that it's an interactive process, and so resilience comes from the interaction between these risk factors and these protective factors. What we know about the systemic nature of poverty is that a lot of times it's related to neighborhood structure as well, which also can be affected by structural policies like redlining and the way districts are comprised. And so the effect is that the neighborhoods bring their own set of risk factors sometimes. So oftentimes lower SES neighborhoods also have a higher rate of unemployment, violence, food insecurity or food deserts, other factors like that again increase the risk factors that the students are experiencing, and it's hard to say exactly how that's coming into the classroom. Like what of all those factors are the students bringing to the school every day? And so, for example, one of my students had a friend who was shot and killed in the middle of our intervention. So that's a trauma that's going to drastically change how they're functioning and their like emotional reactivity or their sense of connectedness. in the middle of the intervention. And so like that's a
Yeah.
significant example, but there could have been other things like their parents started fighting more throughout the year, or a death in the family, or positive things like meeting a new friend and suddenly feeling connected socially to peers. So I think it did open up a way to think about what are all the variables at play.
For studying or what you found, and
Yes.
you talked about a little bit about the literature.
And then I think in terms of the other research that I really delved into was education, cross-cultural education, and what does that look like, and what are the recommendations in cross-cultural education that I could have, that could help explain what happened, and also inform future interventions. So for example, I'm a white woman, I'm coming into a classroom of predominantly students of color. What are the beliefs, past experiences, ideas that these students have about education in general, but also education from a white teacher? What were all their past experiences? Were they positive? Were they negative? Were they neutral? What are they bringing into the room, and how is that affecting their ability to learn, their ability to form a relationship with me, their willingness to trust, and then how can I also help build that trust, and what can I bring to form those relationships? So I think that was an area of research that was very fascinating, that I got more into because I'm not an educator, but that was kind of the gap that I saw after doing the intervention. I was like, this is where, like, this was the gap in my skill set.
Bring any racial factors, or really what you represent for them based on their past experiences?
That's a good question. Not explicitly. I do have a little bit of a southern accent, so I do get asked often, are you country? So I got that, but I don't think there was an explicit, actually I take that back. One of our process groups that we did have was after the election. So I had class the day after, and we broke up into two groups and basically gave them open space to just kind of talk about whatever was on their mind. And so we had a couple of students talk about police violence in their community. So we just had Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore around like in a similar time frame, and so that was very present on people's minds. And then the ongoing police killings or shootings. So the students kind of had space to just process that and say whatever they wanted, and so race was certainly brought up in that discussion. It's interesting because I don't think the students explicitly talked about race in relation to me when we were in the classroom, but I am sure that it was on their mind and present, just as it was in terms of how can I engage in cross-cultural instruction effectively was a question in my mind. So I think even though it wasn't explicitly stated, I think that was a part of what was like a part of our dynamic, for sure. My other two co-facilitators were also white women from my grad program or from Loyola undergrad, so I think that has certain implications in terms of teaching. And it came out in some of the art prompts. So for example, one of the art activities we had, we gave them, one of the prompts was think of a problem that you'd like to solve and like depict a solution to the problem. So on one side they depicted the problem, and on the other side they depicted what was the solution. And a number of them had themes around the election and what the impact might be on them and their day. I think others talked about just worrying about their future and what opportunities they might have, and focusing on like I need to really take kind of step by step, focus on my studies, focus on my schooling.
Wow.
So I think that there were a few that like may or may not have been related, but given the context, felt like you could certainly make the argument that there were issues brought up because of Trump's thing. So when we first started, we did an identity collage, and I don't think there was enough, given that it was only an hour and we were trying to complete the whole project. I think if I could do it again, I would delay that project a little bit, so we could have more time to kind of unpack what identity means, what does culture mean, kind of explore the students' culture, so that when they do their identity collage, those are factors that are much more kind of in their mind, or they're kind of have a shared understanding of what that could be, because I think that would have been a way to like address the cultural differences in the classroom, appreciate and affirm the cultural differences, and also engage them in an art activity about exploring that and connecting with their peers about similarities, differences, perspectives, things like that.